move on to the next study. This is the last one, actually, that we're going to cover, the Golod-Alexander Pyramid Study in Moscow. This was fascinating because there's two things to this. There's the shape of a pyramid, which will show you that we do have products that are shaped like pyramids for this purpose. But also, when you were looking through it, you noticed that many of the effects that were coming from these pyramids in this pyramid study were very, very similar to the effects of orgone. So, Tavon, why don't you go ahead and walk us through the Golod-Alexander Pyramid Study?
When I was looking for this, I was trying to get more information on this study. It was interesting because there, it was, I had to there are some that were in Russian, and I tried to get a more accurate view on the background of who Alexander Golod was or is, and so what's interesting about this is, so in order for him to run this experiment, he was for the University of Moscow, Russian Academy, University of Moscow, and basically they funded his research, and he was coming from a defense contractor background, so I thought that was interesting. And again, this study is interesting because basically what it was is the experiment that was being funded is the field effects of having a large plastic pyramid erected and studying the effects of that large pyramid. Now, he did several of them as described in this article. I recommend this article because there are some others online you have to look through, but interestingly, there are a few trolling blogs about this too. But you know, when you look at what was studied and the data that was gathered and the background and the research, you know, this isn't something that was done in someone's garage. You know, in order to start to create a 44-meter tall pyramid, you need to have some funding. And you know, and anyone who's involved in any kind of DIY project realizes that, you know, you can look at certain things and say, well, this person clearly, they really wanted to find out what was going on in this research. So yeah, rexresearch.com/Golod to look at what I'm looking at here. But basically, he was given the funding to create these large pyramids, and what they found is that these pyramids had some amazing properties. Now, these pyramids were made out of fiberglass, and they weren't just solid fiber. It wasn't just solid fiberglass through the entire pyramid. It was a hollow pyramid. So it was like a thin cladding with some frames, a thin cladding of fiberglass, but mostly fiberglass, and that created the cladding for this pyramid. So you can walk inside the pyramid. They were putting all kinds of samples inside the pyramid, and through their study inside the pyramid and outside the pyramid, they're getting all these amazing effects. The one that stands out right away, having a 44-meter tall pyramid on the outskirts of Moscow, what they found is that they were getting the help of radars from the Russian military, you know, on helicopters to map out the range around the pyramid and into the atmosphere around the pyramid. And what they found was that there was a massive ion column that extended from the vertex, from the point of the pyramid up into the stratosphere. So they weren't expecting that. And also, other than the ion column, there was a kind of like a bubble of ionization just in the environment. And they were actually able to measure that with sensitive equipment. This is also is significant because it also mirrors what Reich was finding as a means of measuring orgone energy. And it's not something that's really mentioned often. You know, how do you measure orgone energy? How do you measure this kind of energy when it's a complex field that permeates the environment? And which is why, you know, you see these videos where people say, oh, here's my, you know, my SHUNGITE tile or my orgone plate, and I put my hand there, oh look, I still see the signal. It's like, no, you can't look at it like that. We're dealing with complex fields that are in a volume of space with ionization, and you're not going to get that from a two-dimensional EMF meter, and because it's changing the structure of the field. It's not necessarily changing the emission of the field. And so what they found through sensitive Geiger counters, like what Reich did, is you had to have sensitive Geiger counters with low pressure vacuum tubes to actually measure the ionization rate within the local environment. And from that, they were able to determine that this pyramid is emitting negative ions just for being there. And this is fiberglass. There's no radioactive material anywhere. It's just a plastic pyramid. But because of its size, it started to give off properties that we'd find were really consistent with people making orgone accumulators. So again, when you read this paper, it talks about there's a difference in pressure from the inside of the pyramid versus the outside of the pyramid. They were finding irregular things like water not freezing inside the pyramid at like far below. I mean, the water show I mean, they're talking about even at negative 40 degrees Celsius, regular water does not freeze inside the pyramid. What's that all about? Something is going on. Water is absorbing energy, and it's not freezing. So basically, this pyramid is able to change the fluid properties of not only what's inside the pyramid, but also in the local environment, which I'll get to shortly at the bottom of the article. They saw some other interesting properties. I know you mentioned pyramid power. This kind of ties into what people are claiming, that just in pure geometry alone, that you can get some interesting effects by having pyramids, like house-sized pyramids on your property or as the roof, or things like that. One of them was dealing with the claim that it changes the materials inside the pyramid. Things like if you have a razor blade, it doesn't go dull if inside the pyramid. Other claims, like if you have a graphite plate, and graphite plate is highly conductive material. You know, and graphite's a very strong, sturdy. I mean, at the atomic, the molecule, graphite molecule, is very. It's like almost like diamond. It's really hard to break or to transform or to deform. But yet, if they took this plate and they put it inside this giant pyramid, it changed the properties of the plate so that it had it lost some of its conductivity and it had higher resistance. And it's like that's unheard of. It's like what process is doing that to graphite? Then we go into some of the healing properties. People claim that it had some healing properties. Also, they're taking medicinal medicines, putting it inside the pyramid, taking it out after a period of time, and then the medicine was stronger. It was more potent. Also, one of the larger benefits of having these pyramids made, they made several of them in the area. They were finding plants were coming back. Crops that were in the area were a stronger yield, but plants that were considered extinct were starting to sprout. And they're like wondering where these plants are coming from, you know, that were considered extinct. So, you know, we have a lot of that. And the one that I wanted to mention also was oil viscosity. They mentioned how a complex of pyramids was installed in the oil field, and within the next few days, the viscosity of the oil decreased by 30%. Now, if you have a technology like that passively, once you build the thing, you can walk away from it, changes the viscosity of the oil in the ground. Now you have an easier method of pumping the oil from the ground, which saves you time, which saves you energy, which saves you money. And of course, they did all these medical research experiments. Now, these pyramids were designed in the golden mean ratio, meaning the proportions were like, you know, fit the golden mean. And so it was able to neutralize geopathic zones, have powerful anti-stress effects, slow the aging process by enhancing immune system, increase vitality in cellular tissue. These are all the tests that they did. And some of them still standing to this day. Slow development of negative processes in living organisms, reduce negative influence of the environment on humans and nature. This starting to sound like a lot of the experiments dealing with orgone energy. But I think because it's so large, it's starting to take on the characteristics because of the sheer size. Like if you had one of these fiberglass pyramids like this size, you're not going to see any of that. You're not going to observe it. And I think when Wilhelm Reich was developing layers of metal and non-metal, it was acting like a lens. So now more down to the human scale, we can make these devices. And if you're using powders or shavings, you can make it in something that's handheld to exhibit these similar properties. So again, this article continues dealing with the field that they observed when they were doing their research with the ionization, in the helicopters and the radar. And they're finding that the active zone, this column of energy, the main column, is above and below the pyramid, as you'd expect, with the geometry and the apex, that you have this beam going up. And I think this also tends to explain why people who make Orgonite pyramids are seeing similar effects with chemtrails if they have 4 or more of them around their property and they see these chemtrails disperse, because you got a column of ions, little pinpricks of ions going up into the atmosphere and binding with the positively charged particulates in the air and sending it into the higher atmosphere. So you have a similar effect with this very large fiberglass pyramid. These are some photos of the pyramids that they built. And then based on that, what I thought was interesting in this article is there's a series of patents that the team, it wasn't just Golod, but you see some other researchers here and professors who went in on the patent. I'm looking at the names here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people started to create a series of patents based on this technology. Once they were able to get these studies, they started patenting right away in year 2000. And this one, apparatus for exposing biological object to energo-informational flux. So basically, I think what they gathered from this research is that there's an information that is kind of like structured water. There's information that's coming from the we'll call it from the quantum field, what have you, that these structures are harnessing. And now in this patent is basically attachments on the top of the pyramid, like aerials, metal aerials, to channel the field out of into the broader, almost like you're broadcasting wherever this complex field is. Now in the article I didn't mention it, but they also mentioned that it had calming psychological effects on things like the inmates within there's a local prison that was within the range of these these pyramids that were being erected. And one of the experiments they did is they had an attachment on top of the pyramids they had a crystal that was inside the pyramid, and they had a similar crystal structure inside the prison system, in these prisons. And what they found is that the crime rate within the prisons dropped when they started doing this experiment. So they tied the reduction in crime directly to, and then the calming behavior to this experiment with this field that was being emitted from these large pyramids. So again, this is another patent dealing with treating biological objects with energy and information. So it's like a form of treatment. And then it continues using it for, again, treatment of seed and for planting. It's very close. It's very close to some of the experiments people are doing with putting electrostatic fields to seeds to reset the genome, to reset, to send the seeds back to, it's almost like its precursor ancient roots. It's very fascinating. There's a whole study around that, but you can't help but wonder with the ionization around these structures, if it's doing that to some capacity with healing seeds, and if it has some way of, let's say, removing the toxic or bad effects of GMOs out of there. But this one I thought was interesting, based on the viscosity of changing the viscosity of oil. They've patented a process for improving the efficiency of crude oil extraction and processing. So maybe in some of these sites where there's a lot of oil wells and oil heads around the world, there might be some pyramids around as well, because again, they patent this process of Russian patents for, well, actually that's a world patent, fascinating, of basically erecting these pyramids and in the environment near the wellhead, and then basically the oil underneath, this viscosity changes so it's easier to pump out of the ground. So obviously, that's going to save a lot of money. So yeah, very fascinating experiment, and it's the reason why pyramids are, by their shape alone, has a, obviously, I think if you think of like just a point on the charged object, the point is where the charges collect to charge or discharge, so automatically has a, an application with interacting with the Earth's ionosphere and local environment. And also, and with that as well, there seems to be some other benefits around that as well with this complex field that's been observed. So this is why people have pyramids who are studying, who are trying to create composites of let's say epoxy resin and metal shavings. They call it Orgonite, these pyramids. They do the same effect but at a smaller scale. It's a scientific effect. There's no occult thing associated with this. I know we get that sometimes. Like, why did you make pyramids? That's like the occult, and you're like, no. There's science behind this. There's a reason why you're using certain objects, and geometries have certain purposes. Geometries in nature. So.
Thank you, and that brings us to our last product we'd like to tell you about, which is our Orgonite SHUNGITE pyramids. So again, we have these pyramids. The whole point is to use that pyramid shape that we were just learning about, directing the energy through the tip. Just having the shape in general really helps with the effect of the orgone energy. What we use these for mostly is to grid a piece of property. So we like to sell them in sets of 4, where you can set one on each corner of your property, which would create an orgone energy grid around your entire home, around your entire property in general. And one thing that we've noticed is that the field that is generated by them when they're put together that way creates an opening in the sky above your house as far as combating the chemtrails. So they transform energy from what's coming down, all the chemicals and metals that are coming down from those chemtrails. They transform that energy and they create a clear patch of blue sky above your house. And we have made several videos showing this. Tavan, would you like to just touch on that briefly?
Yes, I mean, when we first started making these pyramids, I was completely blown away. I know some other people have already made pyramids online, and they're sharing their experiences, what they're seeing in the sky with particulates in the air, aerosols in the air, and the breakup of those aerosols within 30-40 minutes, putting a pyramid out into the front yard, in the backyard. So we wanted to replicate that, and we did. And then that's pretty much what started us for making them not only for us but for our friends, our family, and our customers now. And yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing technology. It seems so simple that the right composite of materials can do this. But I mean, we're dealing with a field effect that works with electric charges, and so we have these blend of metals, including shungite powder, for the reasons we mentioned earlier, that at the quantum level also alters fields for the benefit of the local environment. So we have shungite powder, iron oxide powder, steel powder, and some crystal powders. All of this is in an epoxy resin, and we're glad to offer these for sets of 4 so that you can grid your property or grid your garden. Or if you want, you can have a pyramid in every room. But I mean, like, 1 or 2 pyramids in the house is mostly sufficient. But really, the pyramids are really good for the outside, for conditioning the environment, not only for your house, but also for the local neighborhood. Now, depending on what climate you're in, because we observed this also, like we used to live further up north, and it was more humid up there. What Dr. Wilhelm Reich described is that orgone energy, the effects that are observed from it, are somewhat diminished in a more humid environment where there's a lot of moisture in the water, because water and orgone energy, the water attracts orgone energy, or is attracted to it rather. So it's more buffered. But if you're in a dry climate, a more hot climate, dry climate, more arid climate, you're going to see the effects more pronounced. So what we noticed is that if you're in a more of a humid climate and you got these pyramids around your home and your local neighborhood, maybe for about 5 miles out, you'll see a breakup of whatever aerosol, charged aerosol, particular activity that are in your environment. So you're still going to cover your neighborhood, and it's going to look different. You're going to see patches of blue and even a hole open up, but in the distance you're going to see this film of aerosol spraying. And that's in an arid, that's in a place with more humidity, like a more tropical area, or maybe more in northern or southern latitudes. But if you're in a more arid environment, drier climate, that patch of blue, that hole can open up, I'm talking like 10, 15 miles. It can be very large on a good day. And that's what we've seen. And so yeah, we like to surround our I mean, we have like several dozen of these now around our home. So I think our environment's well conditioned, but yeah, this is what we like to offer.
And we've got a couple more studies, but they'll have to be for another video, especially when you're talking about how Orgone energy brings the rain. So we do have another study we're going to cover in the future about Orgone making a beautiful oasis out of a desert and feeding an entire village. So with that said, we want to say thank you very much for tuning into this video. We hope that we covered enough scientific research to get you excited about the possibilities of using Orgone energy in your life. And with that said, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye for now.